Okay, welcome to the Doctors of Courage podcast. We are going to interview our founder today, Doctors of Courage founder Linda Cheek, MD, and she's going to first start talking about how she's founded Doctors of Courage and her background. Dr. Cheek?
Okay. Thank you, Neil. Yes, I'm basically a second career physician. My first career was a teacher. Actually, my first career was a military spouse. My first husband was in the military for 20 years, but my deciding to go back and go into medical school kind of broke that marriage up. And so I became a physician at the age of 45 I started my practice in 1995. I also moved back to Virginia. I've been living all over the country and the world, following him from base to base. He was an Air Force pilot. But I moved back to Virginia, which was my hometown, home state, sorry. I lived originally in my original life in Falls Church, Virginia, which is right a suburb of Washington, D.C. And so I moved back to Southwest Virginia. My parents had retired to the Southwest Virginia area. So I moved back to Roanoke, and that's where I did my residency. And I started my practice because I wanted to take care of people in a medically underserved area. So I chose the town of Pulaski, Virginia, and I'll go into a little bit of history of that. But basically, that's my history. I was not a doctor since I was in my early 20s or anything. So I had a lot of history, a lot of knowledge. Also, my mother was a nurse, so that gave me a lot of home treatments and healing. Because back in what people don't realize today is that back in my day when I was a child, you never saw a doctor. People knew how to take care of their own health, and they did it very well, mostly with diet and exercise and all the stuff we claim to do today that most people don't do much anymore. And so in fact, I never remember seeing a doctor. We had one doctor come to us at their house, of course, with the black bag and that type of thing. His name was Dr. Jackson. He came to our house in the old style, and back when we didn't have to have medical records, doctors pretty much remembered their patients, and that was about all there was. Just take care of them and leave, and so much easier than it is today. So anyway, I did become a physician then at the age of 45, decided I wanted to take care of patients that had medical needs. So I moved to a rural area that was considered to be medically unserved. That was basically my beginning.
That's very interesting. What kind of teacher were you? What were you teaching when you were a teacher? And tell us a little bit about that. That's very interesting.
Okay. Well, basically, because I had always planned to be a doctor since I was age 6. My mother was a very futuristic woman, you might say, and she, became a nurse in the 1930s. And when I was 6 years old and I made a comment to her, "Mom, I'm going to grow up and be just like you, be a nurse just like you," her reply was, "Linda, you're smart enough to be a doctor." So she planted that seed in my head at the age of 6. And so I just basically followed my mother's instructions and planned to be a doctor since age 6. The crux that kind of disturbed my future was that in my third year of college at UT UT Austin was where I went. I met my husband to be, and I gave up my career to be a doctor so he could follow his career to be a military pilot. But what I taught, because I then chose to, I'd been studying all the sciences and everything to be a doctor. And so when I changed my career to be a teacher and took all the teaching courses, I became a teacher of science. So in the course of my moving from Enid, Oklahoma to San Antonio, Texas, to Upper Hayford, England, to Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, back to San Antonio, I basically taught everything from biology, general science to in middle school, biology, advanced biology, bio 2, and chemistry. The only science I never taught was physics.
Okay, so you have a very strong background in the scientific process, scientific theory, the underlying basis of science, and you taught it to children for many years. So you, I would say, would have a very strong background in science, and then you went on into medicine and learned medical and went to medical school. And you said at age 45, I found that very interesting. How many female physicians were in your medical school class?
Oh, probably not very many. It was, you know, it's grown now to be almost half of the medical school classes are females. But back when I was there, you know, it was still quite a good number. I'd say probably maybe a fifth to a quarter or so of the class was female.
Okay, and in your mom's time, I'm sure it was very rare.
Very rare. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. That's good. So then tell me about your medical practice. What medical practice did you establish, after your residency and training in family practice, you said, correct?
Right.
Tell me a little bit about those early years of your practice.
Okay. Well, a family practice was my residency. And so I'm bored of doing the same thing all the time. So I like the idea of family practice. Everybody who walks into the door has got something different going on. So I did some investigating down in the Southwest area, and there was a doctor, Dr. James Hilton in Pulaski, who was advertising to have a partner because he wanted to retire. So he wanted his person to come in and basically take over his practice. So this was actually supported by the hospital in the area. The hospital then was called Columbia HCA. It's gone through several name changes because of what I'm going to explain here shortly. It's now called Lewis Gale Medical Center in Pulaski. But what happened was they made a contract with me to come to the area for 3 years, and I was to join Dr. Hilton. Dr. Hilton was paid by the hospital over $100,000 to have me join them because of the quote cost to bring in a new doctor. And then I got a salary. Okay. And but what happened was I found out this was all a hoax. This was basically a hospital kickback to the doctors in the area that were their chosen doctors. And this had happened more times than mine. He had other doctors join him in the past, other doctors, not even him, but other doctors, the internal medicine doctors, another family practice group. They would bring doctors into the area. The hospital would give them a salary and pay the doctor's group that brought the doctor in. And then once the contract was over, the doctor would be basically kicked out, and they'd repeat the process all over again. So what this was, basically, was illegal kickbacks into the hands of the doctors that had those chosen clinics. So Dr. Hilton was the one who was getting his money. What happened was he got 1 year's worth, and then the second year, the hospital didn't pay him the $110,000. And so he said, well, if I'm not going to get paid, goodbye. And basically he fired me, but yet I still had 2 years of contract with the hospital. So I was stuck there. But Hilton basically he was going to do the same thing with another doctor. And I said, Jim, if you do that, I'm going to sue you because, this is a breach of contract, what you've done. So he didn't bring in another doctor. He did finally retire, but still I was persona non gratis in the area because I was stuck there and yet I wasn't welcome. And so the hospital started saying bad things about me. And while I still had to go into the hospital and do things, and the other associated doctors in the hospital would literally change the record and just do things to basically try to make my record look bad. This is where I actually got into trouble because I turned them in as a whistleblower. Problem was, I did not know the proper proceedings to actually be a whistleblower. So I don't think my whistleblowing ever did anything except notify the hospital that I had been a whistleblower. And so another hospital or doctor or whatever down in Texas did the same thing. And there they actually did, their whistleblowing actually did make it to the courts. And Columbia HCA actually got fined and charged with fraud. And you will never believe who the CEO at the time was. I'm not going to waste time waiting for you to guess. Rick Scott. Okay. He left the CEO-ship of Columbia HCA. And guess what? He is now Senator of Florida. Whereas I'm a felon for doing the job of whistleblowing against the company that, did that not only to me, but to other doctors. So that's basically the history of how I became a target, because I was brought in to be a doctor that I was supposed to then leave the area, and I didn't. And then I did the whistleblowing thing, which didn't help, and ended up then see, because I started healing people. Did you have a question? Or I go into
I just wanted to say that your story is a common story that I've heard personally, and many people who have joined the Doctors of Courage. I've heard many of the same similar stories of physicians who've either whistleblowed or complained about a certain situation, and then they were retaliated against, and that begins a downward spiral of their career. And it's common medicine, and it's not only just doctors who have experienced it, but nursing and other healthcare staff. And over the last 20 years, probably since you've been practicing, it's come to a head where now doctors and nurses are quitting in droves. Mm-hmm. And you can see the consequences of this kind of milieu that has been allowed to persist, where people suffer for speaking out for what they believe. But anyway, please continue your story and explain to me what happened in your early career, and how did that lead to some issues following your whistleblowing activities.
Okay. Well, while I was working with Dr. Hilton in his office, I was basically just seeing many of his patients. And so they were patients that had already been diagnosed and were on medicine. And I was just basically continuing their regimen. Then one day I ended up with somebody that came in with some complaints. And I actually diagnosed my first patient with the first disease of diabetes. And I put him on the first medication, which at that time was metformin. And suddenly a light bulb went off in my head. Linda, he's going to be on this medicine for life. You're not curing his diabetes, but diabetes is curable. So, we need to come up with showing people how to cure disease, not just maintain it. And I had also, in the course of my medical school, when the professor would say, for example, like aphthous ulcer, which for people who are listening to this, an aphthous ulcer is basically those little white spots that you get in your mouth that are sore and tender, and they just, will go away in time, but there's not really much conventional medicine to do for it. When they talked about something like that, and the professor at the medical school would say, well, there's nothing that will treat that. And I knew different, because I knew natural medicines that actually did cure things like aphthous ulcers. And so, and that would be myrrh, the powdered myrrh you put on the aphthous ulcer. Now I know some other tricks too that I've learned from my own studies. So in 1997, with this new patient, I finally said to myself, okay, Linda, you're going to have to learn how to heal disease, not just maintain it like that's all conventional medicine will do, is maintain disease. So my first thing to do was I went to learn acupuncture, and I went out to California and did a 200-hour acupuncture course and spent a month in training there. And one of the days that I was there, acupuncture is very complicated, and I can do acupuncture to a degree, or I did, but it's very complicated, and I actually found easier ways of treating people healthfully. And that was through one session that a doctor gave us at the acupuncture training, and that was on auricular therapy. Auricular therapy is where you use the ear, and the places on the ear where there are points that if you stick a needle in them, or even just push put pressure on them, it actually directs energetically to different parts of the body and can bring those body parts to heal. And so this gentleman did a 3-hour talk on auricular therapy, and I happened to be one of his subjects for a demonstration. I had had a condition in my hip, my right hip, which has been hurting me since 1991. And it had been diagnosed as trochanteral bursitis. And so I actually got up in front of everybody and he did the needles in my ear. And I didn't have pain go away immediately, but within 3 days, I had no pain. I was walking the streets of San Francisco, which are like this, and my husband and I were dancing. Now, this is a husband after my military husband.
Well,
This is my
that's a
husband number
phenomenal
2.
story. That's a phenomenal story. Why do you think, Dr. Cheek, that alternative forms of therapy, alternative forms of medicine have increasingly found disfavor in medical practice? Because if you look at Europe and other countries like China, which has 1 billion people, or India, which also has 1 billion people, or Europe, like Germany, for example, they're very into naturopathic medicine, homeopathic medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, acupuncture, and different types of medicine, the ways our grandmothers would practice. We used to call it grandmother medicine. Why does that fall into such disfavor, and why do physicians who are open-minded and pursue these kind of alternative medical sciences, why are they attacked, and why is it disfavored? You just talk about that.
Sure. Well, one of the things we have created in conventional medicine is the need for double-blind, trials that are supposedly supposed to prove whatever they set out to prove. And that's basically what they do, is whatever the creator decides they want to prove, they cherry pick the people to get into these studies so that they get either their drugs approved by the FDA or they get their idea accepted. And the problem is, even though studies are being done with alternative medicine, they're not being published. No conventional publication, Journal of American Medicine, any of these will publish anything pertaining to alternative medicine. Why? You have to kind of go to the administrators of those organizations, I guess, to find out. But I think it's money. I think that most of them basically have their assets and their retirement and everything set up in pharmaceutical companies and stocks and so on, and they just aren't going to go the direction of alternative medicine, because you cannot what's the word? Sometimes these words kind of slip my head. Patent. That's the word. You cannot patent a drug that's herbal, basically. So all of these things, it's just basically, I think, it's just driven by money. And the other problem, there's one problem with homeopathy and getting homeopathy approved, because homeopathy is so individualized. No two people are alike in the homeopathic realm. So you can't even get 10 people into a study to see that one drug or one homeopathic remedy works, because everybody is so different. And that's one. So, doing a study on homeopathics is just, it can't happen, basically.
It's an American phenomenon that you see, because, like I mentioned, those other countries, they have a very strong alternative form of medical practice. And the United States, for years, we developed chiropractic science. We also developed we're very strong in homeopathy. Dr. Hahnemann, he, in Philadelphia, where I live now, he developed a form of treatment. And I'm wondering, is this a new phenomenon, or is this something that just has happened relatively recently, last 20, 30, 40 years, where, those kind of treatments are disfavored?
Well, what happened, there were basically 5 medicines that were accepted back in the early 1900s. And they were, conventional medicine, Western medicine, homeopathy, like you said, chiropractic, and shoot, now I can't remember the other one. Doctors of osteopathy. All those medicines, and herbal medicine. Okay, those were all accepted. But what happened was in 1874, the American Medical Association came out and said, and actually got political. That's where, things changed, was when the medical society gets political and basically had the Congress create a law that made all of those this was in 1930s, made all those other medicines, all those natural medicines become illegal. And the only medicine that was allowed to be practiced was conventional Western medicine with pharmaceuticals. So it was basically all and what happened, the reason for that was it was too much competition. Conventional doctors, there were too many doctors out there. There was too much, and so basically the money was being spread too thin. And so the conventional medical doctors wanted to basically, constrict the area of medicine so that more doctors, more conventional doctors would be paid, and these other doctors wouldn't be able to practice. So that was all, everything in this country is about money, Neil. Even today.
Okay, so it's kind of like we're in the Middle Ages where there's guilds and this is the way you have to do things. And, are you saying that, medicine has become more of a guild and you're either a part of the guild or you're not part of the guild, like in the Middle Ages, and that has hampered, freedom of thought or freedom of ideas and freedom of different various types of treatments. And you're saying that we treat the symptoms and not the underlying cause. So if we're not doing that, we cannot actually solve the problem of healing. And I think that's very interesting. Well, let's move on a little bit to why you started Doctors of Courage and some of the initial problems you had, when you started practicing and expressing yourself, as a free person and a free physician.
Okay. Well, of course, I started Doctors of Courage in 2016, and that was way after, this part we've been talking about, my learning how to help people heal. But it's as a result of my learning how to help people heal, because it was basically after I was incarcerated for 2.5 years. And that was after the second attack on me. I've actually been through 2 attacks. The first attack was in 2000. I was raided in 2006. And that was as a result of the fact that Lewis Gale and Columbia HCA wanted me out of the picture. And so they made basically, I'm sure that it was their attack on me that brought the U.S. attorneys in to raid my office. I got into treating pain because, again, with the alternative medicines that I use, the homeopathy, I'm sorry, not homeopathy, the acupuncture led me to auricular therapy. Auricular therapy led me to Searoyal, which is the company that I went up to Toronto, Canada to learn. And that's where I learned about homeopathy. And I also learned about prolotherapy there. And my mentor at the time was a Dr. Gerard Guignot. He was a French physician. His practice, though, was in Belgium. And so he came to Toronto and taught us. And so it was through learning these that I actually learned that pain, even though a person said, because I was very much like every other doctor of our time, was that if a person came in and said, "Oh, I have pain in my back," and I would say, I'm thinking of one patient in particular in the 1990s, and I said, what's the cause of your pain? "Oh, I was in a motor vehicle accident 25 years ago," and immediately what jumps into my mind is, "Oh, you're a drug seeker. That should be fixed by now. You shouldn't be having pain from a 25-year-old motor vehicle accident." But what I learned studying natural medicine is, yes, you do have pain following a 25-year motor vehicle accident because the cause never was addressed. Conventional medicine doesn't address the cause. It covers up the symptoms. And so you'll continually have loose joints. I learned this from the prolotherapy. The motor vehicle accident stretched the joints and stretched the ligaments in the back. And so you're going to have those loose ligaments until you get prolo done to tighten them back up again. The loose ligaments in the back make the vertebrae rub on each other, which causes the degeneration of the disc, which leads to herniations. So everything builds up because we don't address the cause. So, my first impression of this lady was, "Oh, you're a drug seeker." And then after I learned alternatives, I was felt so bad because she wasn't. She was real. She had real pain. My first pain patient I actually took care of and actually continued him on his medications was a chronic pancreatitis patient. Now that's a pain that never goes away either. And so I basically got introduced and was willing to treat these patients with pain. And then, of course, once I learned the natural alternatives to actually heal people, I didn't have any problem accepting patients with pain. And then we had a doctor in our area that was attacked, and basically immediately the DEA came in and took his license away, his certificate away, and all of his patients then became abandoned. And so I started taking those patients in and started maintaining and actually reducing their opiate loads, because I could actually treat them and get them through my techniques that I used. I could actually get them to come off of their medicines. But then the DEA raided me in 2006. And so that.
Before we get to that 2006 raid, so let me do a recap. So it seems like you taught children and you taught them the scientific method, and it looks like that you've taken some of those scientific methods and you kept an open mind. You went into medicine late, in your life. And so that you were looking, it seems like you were trained and not indoctrinated in one type of medicine, and that you try to treat many different types of people, and you learned that chronic injuries can persist. I mean, we see that in athletes, right? Athletes hurt themselves, and sometimes they can never, play professional sports again. Their body doesn't heal. Even if it takes 5 years, 10 years, we have high school athletes who are permanently injured. They can never go back into the NBA because their body never heals. But you figured out there were other treatments to take care of these people. And obviously the hospital in your area probably did not like these alternative treatments. Nope. And so what happened in 2006?
Okay. The problem with Lewis Gale and Columbia HCA Hospital was that once the patients started to see me, they never graced the doors of the hospital again. I had basically COPDers that were in the hospital, quite regularly, who would start to see me. And like I said, they never had to go back to the hospital. So I was taking away income from the hospital, and they did not like that at all. So anyway, what happened is the DEA and about 26 officers came into my office. Luckily, they did not come in with guns drawn and flak jackets on and all that stuff like so many doctors see today, and so many people are, traumatized with. They just basically came in and in their normal outfits and everything, not waving guns. They had the guns in their holsters on their hips, but not waving them in everybody's face.
Well, 26 people sound like a shock and awe scenario. What were they looking for? What were they concerned about that you were doing?
Well, they just put me in a room and made me stay there for 8 hours and couldn't move except to go to the bathroom. So I really don't know what all they did, but they did confiscate multiple charts. I think it was like 128 charts. They came in with with basically just a DEA administrative judge warrant, which isn't a standard search warrant. It's just that anytime the DEA says, I want to raid this doctor's office, they get an automatic search warrant to do it. They don't have to have justification. So they came in with, quote, Medicare fraud as the justification, but the records they took out were uninsured patients, patients on regular commercial insurance. There were a few Medicare, a few Medicaids, but for the most part, the general consensus of all the records they took were patients that were on opiates. So basically they were just simply grabbing records so that they could create a case. And that's what they still do today. They just go into the doctor's office with this automatic carte blanche card that the administrative judge gives them.
How did the case start against you? Do you know for sure if the hospital started it, or to this day you don't? No.
Don't
okay.
know.
So they took all your medical records, and what would subsequently?
Well, not all of them. They took 128 of them.
Okay, and then what subsequently happened? In those early 2000s.
Right. Well, I did get me a lawyer, and I was lucky with that. I was able to hire a lawyer, and basically it took them 2 years. But you see, the problem is that doctors don't realize that the same thing that I thought was, well, they raided my office, and within a few months, nothing had happened. And I thought, oh, okay, well, everything's good, I'm safe, and so on. But that's not the case. You see, what happens is this is all just simply about job security. So when they go into a doctor's office, they confiscate the records, and then they take those records to the U.S. Attorney's Office, where they can then mull through them for the next 2 years. Nothing happened to me until I was never really indicted. I was never really arrested. Nothing ever happened to me. They never did, come up with any kind of case against me. They just basically talked to my lawyer, and I basically told my lawyer, I'm not pleading to anything. One of the interesting things they do that people need to understand is that they take all of the doctor's employees and basically turn them into their witnesses, and then they grill these witnesses and actually tell them, if you don't say these lies, you will be charged yourself. And so they actually force perjury out of the doctor's employees, out of the doctor's patients. And they did all that with my patients and my employees. I had one nurse who stood her ground. She told me later that she had been basically talked to and at the police station for 6 hours, and basically told, if you don't say these lies that Dr. Cheek did this, this, and this, then you will be going to prison. But she said, well, put me there then. I mean, she was really strong-willed. They still kept her as a witness, though, and I was actually with the second. I'm kind of jumping ahead. That was actually with the second attack on me later on.
So let's stick with the first attack.
Stick with the first attack.
Yeah, let's go through that and finish that before we move on to that one.
Right.
But explain that, the first attack, and what happened, and what were you eventually charged with anything, or?
Well, I finally took a plea. And the reason for that was I had no money, because I'd been trying to build my own practice since I had been left Dr. Hilton, and I built me an office that was supposed to be an office, an alternative medicine office. What did they find? Well, literally nothing, except the fact that I had a program that I had developed, that I had all of my pain patients take, where we did counseling, we did auricular therapy, and they had to buy some remedies and take those remedies to be healed. And I did that, and I did not charge for those sessions. I did charge for the evaluation of their record and their maintaining their opioids and whatever drugs they were on. I did do that, but the government tried to say that and actually that's what what they found, what they actually charged me with, was that on one of my trips to Toronto, my nurse practitioners, I had two nurse practitioners working for me. One of my nurse practitioners had billed to my number on 6 patients. That was in a week's trip. So he might have seen well over 100 people in that week. And he billed 6 patients to my number while I was gone. But that was what we, at the time, the law said was we could do. The Medicare rules said that if a mid-level doctor or practitioner sees a doctor's patient and does no changes, simply renews their medicine, that you can bill to the doctor's number. So that's what he did with only 6 patients. But the government said that was Medicare fraud, and they would not back off from that, even though it wasn't Medicare fraud.
I don't understand how that happened. I mean, you go to CVS and they have minute clinics and they're staffed by nurse practitioners. They're seeing people every day.
Mm-hmm. They might bill to their own, each nurse practitioner has their own number. In that case, they're probably billing to the nurse practitioner's number.
So, okay. So the fraud was not that the service wasn't done. It was billed on your name instead of their name.
Right.
And that was the criminal offense.
Right.
6 charges.
Yeah, I was paid $11 per patient more than I should have been. So that was $66 is what the justification was that they finally came up with to force me to take a plea. And of course, my lawyer said if I did,
they destroyed your life
Exactly.
for $66.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Now, they didn't say, oh, this is an error, or it seems like a harmless error or anything like that.
No, because they wanted the hospital wanted me out of the area, wanted me
Okay.
gone. Okay.
I see. So, okay. So they came in, it seems like to me, from what you've explained in the story, because this is the first time I'm really hearing it, that they came in, rated you on some other pretext, took your charts, really couldn't find anything,
Mhm.
then said that, oh, you were in Toronto while your nurse practitioner was covering you and seeing patients. They didn't want, are they saying that they didn't want to pay for the service of the nurse practitioner seeing the patient? The government said that they didn't want to pay for
No,
that?
no, they just said that they billed to my number instead of their number.
Okay,
That was
so,
it. That
okay,
I was fraudulently I was fraudulently billing because it was my number that went to Medicare. I was
okay,
fraudulently billing for patients that I never saw. Okay.
I see.
But they
Okay.
weren't following the actual rules of the
So
time. I don't know what the rule is now.
so what
Um,
was the plea deal for, and what did you have to
okay.
pay? What happened with your license and whatnot? Can you tell me
Okay.
all that?
Yeah, this is an interesting little bit too. December 7th of 2000, took them 2 years to do this. And my lawyer said when they went into meetings with her, that there were more people at that meeting that he'd ever seen in his life with, FBI and CMS people. And of course the DEA and everybody. He said he never had been in a meeting with so many people before. And he had also been the lawyer for Cecil Knox, who was a previous doctor that had been attacked in our area. And so basically they were really out to get me. Okay. And he recognized that fact. So basically he said, Linda, it's going to cost you $500,000 to $1 million to go to trial. And he worked out a plea agreement where I would get 6 months probation and that would be it.
Why does
And
it cost $500,000 to argue a $66? Why does trial cost so much? I mean, I have been in the medical system for years. I mean, heart transplants and lung transplants where you take why does trials cost so much? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I honestly don't know, except of course, they have to make their hourly money, and of course then they have to prepare, and I'm sure there's hours of preparation and so on. I mean, for the most part, I think most trials do run about $500,000. I don't think that's unusual.
No, okay, okay, so for a doctor, um, you know, I guess so it should cost $500,000. I guess they should plan for that. I mean, if one takeaway from this is if now what should you have done? What did your lawyer say? Did your lawyer say anything about the nurse practitioners who are taking? If the patients come in, if you go on vacation, should you shut down your practice? Is that the safest thing? Is that the safest takeaway that you would say, or you would tell the patients? I mean, go to the ER of the hospital if you can't see the nurse practitioner, or is CVS committing fraud? I need to know.
Well, they have their nurse practitioners have their own number to submit check claims under their number. And so, I guess they would, to be safe.
Did you have a billing service?
No, I didn't. We built our own. We just had a person in our front office do our billing.
Okay.
So, just a nurse practitioner just bill to their number. Don't bill to the doctor's number. They did that because they thought that was what they were supposed to do. That it's the doctor's patient, it should be under the doctor's number. But what happened was, this is another interesting little bit. December 7th of 2007, I signed a plea agreement that basically just said I was guilty of the six billings to my number. But what happened was, come February 28th of 2008 is when I was supposed to go before the judge and be, and have the plea accepted. The day before that, my lawyer got a change in the plea agreement that was brought down by the U.S. attorney, and the reason for that was the assistant U.S. attorney that was on my case. His name was Pat Hogaboom. He had his one above him, the U.S. attorney. His name was John Brownlee, and Brownlee was trying to become a judge. And when he looked at the case that Hogaboom turned into him and saw that they had spent 2 years and all they were going to get was a 6-month probation on me, nothing else, and that he said, nope, this is not going to cut it. We're going to charge her with fraud for all of those visits that she did while she was doing the alternative treatments, the counseling and the acupuncture and so on. And even though those were never billed to insurance. So they added these additional charges onto my plea agreement, and I'd already signed the plea agreement. I do not know how they could do that. The plea agreement was already signed, but they changed it. So I was stuck with, okay, if I say no now and I go to trial, they can produce this plea agreement that I signed in December of 2007 and say, see, she signed the plea agreement that she was guilty. And so I was literally caught. So I had to agree to a worse plea agreement than what I actually signed so that I could go to in front of the judge the next day. And so I went to in front of the judge the next day, and he saw that I was guilty of all of this. And so he gave me, instead of the 6-month probation, he gave me 2 years probation, and I had to pay $24,000 to Medicare that I never got paid in the first place. And they made money off of me. Of course, they made money off every doctor they charge.
Right. Now, let me ask you, how much were you making? Millions of dollars? I mean, how much money were you making as a family practitioner, if you don't mind me asking?
My highest salary that I ever made in any year that I worked there was $24,000. A truck driver made more than I did.
Okay.
And the reason for that was I was trying to start my practice. Then I got fired by Dr. Hilton, so I started from scratch, and I was building up my practice. And I had my 2 nurse practitioners that I had to pay, and so my salary was the last one on the money had to go into paying the mortgage for the building and so on. So right. I never really I was always working with the idea of future income. Never had it at the time. Okay.
So, all right. So you weren't making a ton of money, but they wanted to ruin your life anyway over small things. So you kind of, it seemed like you were hamstrung into signing a deal, and they didn't like the alternative medicine either, huh?
No.
So, okay. So the government doesn't want you to practice the way you want to.
Right. And also the government is now, and I can tell this way back then, I actually told one of my patients when all this happened and I was having to basically close my business, and he came in for his visit. And I said, you know what they're doing, don't you? And he looked at me and he said, no, what? He says, and I told him right then, this was in 2007 or 2008, they're getting rid of the expendable population. And he looked at me, what do you mean? And I said, basically the expendable population are the poor, the elderly, the Medicare, Medicaid, and the disabled. Okay, because all of those people drain our economy. They're not adding to the economy; they're draining it. So they just as soon see those people dead. And then also they want to get rid of independent physicians. They're also getting rid of independent pharmacists. If you notice, most everybody that's attacked is not a hospital paid clinician. They're all independent. You don't
see any physician at Minute Clinic, like I said, a nurse practitioner or a pharmacist from CVS or Walgreens going to prison. Right. So this brings up a very interesting point, because if you go, there are many different hamburger restaurants that serve hamburgers in different ways, and it's up to the person who frequents those hamburgers. Or there's Chipotle and Qdoba and different Taco Bell, different fast food restaurants, different ways to make, so there's different ways of treating a patient, correct? It's up to the patient to decide which establishment they'll frequent and which doctor they'll frequent. And the doctors are going to have different trainings and methodologies and philosophies, correct? And that's what, that variety is what, people will seek, correct?
But that's the way it should be.
Okay, but you're saying that's not the way it is in medicine anymore.
No, the government wants to be in control of our lives and our deaths. And the
Okay.
only way they're going to do that is to have every doctor be owned by a hospital, because then the hospital directs whether you live or whether you die. And I saw that with my own husband when he had his cardiac arrest 2 years ago. He was immediately, the hospital was trying to put him on DNR. And I said, no way, Jose.
And that's a very interesting point, because now let me ask you something from your perspective. Do you feel that physicians are making more money or less money than they did over time? Because you've been practicing for a while, and I know your time, but you've also communicated with a lot of doctors. Do they feel like they're making a lot more money or less money over the last, 20, 30, 40 years?
Gosh, I'm not sure about that. Neil, you probably know more about, because I really was kind of stuck out there in the wilderness by myself. But I would say that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think most hospital-owned physicians are salaried. They don't make a portion. Isn't that right? Most hospital-owned physicians are salaried.
Well, I know the cost of medical care keeps going up more and more every year. And is it because we're coming out with new treatments, or new technologies, and those technologies are costing more, or are the doctors making more money, and
it's not the doctors, it's the hospitals.
Okay,
It's
so
the hospitals that are making more money. We had a clinic in our area, Carillion, which is another big hospital. It's competition to Lewis Gale. Carillion came in and started buying up all the independent doctors' offices and trying to make them become partners with Carillion. And one of the doctors in Pulaski actually became a Carillion physician, but he did it with a stipulation that if he wanted to leave, that they would not put him on a non-complete clause, which most doctors have if they don't stay in the hospital. So he went in, and his approach was, well, they want you to order every test that you can. They want you to send everybody to PT. They want you to do all the blood work you can, order all the procedures you can. So basically the hospital is using their clinic-owned doctors to make money, and it's really not needed for the patient. And I don't know, except the fact that I think the government and the hospitals are in cahoots together, and I don't know how that works. Somebody out there should basically whistleblow on that. But the hospital and the government are in cahoots while the government is allowing this to happen, and take out the independence. Independent doctors work for the patient. They don't work for the hospital and order all these tests.
Well, they're running their own, like you said, if you're running your own restaurant, you have your own clientele you serve, you have your own methods of doing something, and people will frequent you based on, I guess, your results and your personality, and whether they like coming to your establishment versus some other, the hospital or whatnot. So you're, competing in a way based on your knowledge and your, bedside manner or whatever. Okay, so now you talked a little bit about this disaster that occurred to you, where you had to now, agree to committing a crime, I guess, for a small sum of money, with a disastrous consequence. How did that affect your practice, and what happened to you after that?
Okay. Well, basically, because no one would take my patients, because we were in an area, like I said, where another doctor was also attacked, and basically all the other doctors were scared to take my patients, because most of them were pain patients at this point. So they, within 3 months, they were all being off their medicine. And I actually met a doctor, and that was a God thing. God actually steps in and does help when there's a need. He presented to me another doctor who was retired, and she agreed to come in and take care of my patients for me while I was basically without a license. So she came in September of 2008, and I did not advertise it, because I, just by word of mouth. Some of the patients found out that, we had another doctor in there that could take care of them. So they came back. And even though my lawyer said you will not get your license back, it'll take you more than a year to get your license back, I actually did present my request for a relicense for getting it reinstated in October of that year. and I got my license reinstated in February of 2009. So I was literally only without a license for about 9 months. And then,
All right. And okay, that's first of all good. Congratulations on that. My question is, why are there so many pain patients? Is it were there a lot of blue collar jobs or a lot of
Yeah.
white collar jobs where you're at?
yeah, in the Pulaski area is a lot. There's lots of blue collar, lots of we have a Volvo plant. We have, various different types of, you know, factories. It's a factory area. And so there
So,
was,
so a lot of physical activity
yeah,
causes wear and tear, and those people develop chronic pain. I mean,
right,
these people are not, lawyers or bankers or something like that, just shuffling paper around, right? So
right.
they tend to have a lot of chronic pain. So you had a lot of chronic pain patients
hmm
because of the makeup of your area.
Right.
Okay. And so you were treating those patients to help
But
those.
we're a stone's throw from Appalachia. Okay.
Okay.
It's throw a stone across the mountain and you hit Appalachia. So, and of course, that's where you have the coal industry and so on. So, I mean, there are a lot of just, blue collar working,
So
hard
it's
working area.
reasonable for those people to suffer, injuries in their jobs.
Right.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Okay, so now let's move on to, I guess, your second attack, and if you could briefly
Well,
explain what
actually,
there.
let's do that in the next video, if that's okay.
Yeah,
Can we come back and do
absolutely.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. And because one of the things I'd like to talk about is why did they attack you again? Because it seems like it's a common thing when I talk to other physicians. It's like a bullying thing. It's just repeated bullying. You're supposed to have learned your lesson the first time around after the punishment. Is the punishment not severe enough, or are these doctors not getting it? I would like to talk about that in a second.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll look forward to that. And I do
Thank you so
thank you for bringing me on, and do hope that people can learn from this and join us on Doctors of Courage so that we can actually stop this from happening to other physicians, other families, other patients, and so on. So we need to, and hopefully in a future video, we'll actually talk about how we are going to be able to do away with this Controlled Substance Act. That is what the government is using against us. No more drug war. I'm going to take on that phrase that's going on around the country. Okay. All right. Thank you, Neil.
You're welcome. Okay, how was that?
Wait, we're not done. I gotta